Welcome everyone. My name is Jing Herman. I'm the co-founder of 28 Muses. This is our Build the Future of Work community with lots of future work builders, investors, a lot of founders here. And every single week we gather Tuesday at 5 p.m. to talk about a different future work topic. Today I'm really excited because this is really the topic that's closest to my heart, creativity. And I'm really excited to bring Professor Melanie Brucks from Columbia Business School. She is an expert on creativity. And so let me spotlight her so you can all see her. And Melanie, do you want to start with so simply talk about like your background and your career path, and why did you choose creativity? Why is that like the one thing that you chose to study?
Yeah, absolutely. Can everyone hear me? I switched my microphone, so I want to make sure. Okay, we're all good. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here today. I discovered creativity kind of serendipitously. I started my PhD at Stanford, and the way that it worked there is as a first year PhD student, you had to meet with the faculty, pitch an idea, and then if they liked it, you could start that research project. And that was an incredibly intimidating idea to have to come up with an idea from scratch, pitch it to like some of the best faculty in the entire world, and see if they liked my idea well enough to like actually work on it. And so the first couple of months of doing this, a lot of like, that's not creative enough, you need to think bigger. And it was a really stressful time. And then I realized, oh, I can kind of do two birds with one stone. I can actually research creativity and research how we come up with ideas. And that would help me get my own research done and also be potentially a topic that the faculty would be interested in. So it was very much that it was a struggle for me. I was having a hard time coming up with ideas.
I love that. I love that creativity was your solution. So I think creativity is a big buzzword. I think we all have, that they're the basics. Like we know that it's about thinking outside the box, creative problem solving. So today we want to like massage it and dig a little deeper. We have 20 minutes before we do a one-on-one match. So we have a lot to tackle. Feel free to chime in or ask a question in the chat, everyone. I love to hear from you. This is not a webinar. This is a very interactive Zoom. I want to do a match at 5:25 p.m. Eastern here, so that everyone can meet someone new. And then at 5:30, if you are in 30 minutes, if you're still available, we can come back to the main room and continue our group discussion and a little more Q&A. So in 20 minutes, let's tackle, kind of like your most surprising findings about creativity. And then, we've been recently talking about how creativity is an amazing DEI tool because it really bridges generations and, even gender gaps, right? And, there's a lot of meat here. So let's start with, let's say, a definition of creativity. And actually, I would love for everyone to put in the chat. What do you define, like one sentence, what is creativity to you? To me, creativity in business has been about finding a shortcut to solve a problem, to achieve a goal, meet a vision that takes less time and less resources. And I would love to hear from you, Professor Brooks, like what is your definition and how have you seen it like in practice with teams based on your research? And I know your dissertation was about ideation and different ways to maximize.
Yeah, it's a great question how you define creativity. And one thing that's really interesting to me is how different groups of people define it so differently. So the way I always saw it was really through idea generation and problem solving, because that's what creativity meant in my work. And when I talk to people who aren't in like this type of specific field, they think of it more as like artistic or aesthetic. But really from like an academic perspective, it's a process more than anything else. And it's coming up with products, solutions, ideas that are both novel, different from what's already been done, but also appropriate. It solves something in the context of where you're trying to come up with ideas. And so really, we're creative all the time. Anytime we identify a new potential direction to go, anytime we have a problem and we have to come up with a solution, even when we're having conversations with people, coming up with a new perspective, all these involve a cognitive process of creativity, which is what we look at in academia.
I love that, and I think in the chat, I think most people, the most common thing is solving a problem. Maybe let's jump to, I wanted to talk about that gender bias at the end, but while we're on problem solving, let's jump to that. In the community, because a lot of founders, it's mostly men, I would say, and even this audience today, I think it is mostly men. And it was surprising you brought up this gender bias in the research that most creativity associated with women is all about like arts and crafts versus creativity associated with men is problem solving. I didn't
Mhm.
think of it that way until you said it, but now after you said it, I realized it. I think it really is true, and could that bias between like how creativity is associated for women and men, does that explain some of the differences in the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's a really important finding and it's across multiple different contexts. So if you look at it even in the scientific space where we study this and we should be aware of it, we see that women scientists and their discoveries are less cited than male scientists and their discoveries when they're coming up with new things. We see it a lot in the entrepreneurship space, and particularly in these in the boardrooms and these big decision making, powerful positions that women are much less likely to be there. But also, of course, there's many other groups that are underrepresented, specifically in the creativity space. And again, I think that it's important to empower that anyone can be creative. It's not just like there's specific these creative geniuses, which we kind of put on these pedestals, like Elon Musk or something like that, as that's what creativity is. But really, we all have the power to solve problems and to come up with new ideas and to think about things differently. And in fact, having more diversity and perspective enhances our creativity. So this is interesting finding where we think the most creative people are one type of person, when the truth is the most creative people is everyone together from these different perspectives, approaching problems in different ways, in order to see a solution that we otherwise would not have considered.
Actually, I have a little poll prepared. Let's say you talked about everyone is creative, and that's what I believe. But I'm gonna launch a quick poll. Everyone, you tell me. Do you believe creativity is innate or is it learned? Don't let what Melanie and I believe influence you. I think it's either in and you can ask the same question about EQ or IQ, right? Creativity, I think, it's a form of intelligence. It's recognized to be, and you could have difference of opinion on whether EQ or IQ is innate versus it can really be trained, like in a business context, right? You take someone fresh out of college, can you train them to be more creative? Okay, so it sounds like 84% said innate and can be trained and enhanced, and 16% said learned and trained by experiences. So most of us, we agree. So let's take the assumption that it is trainable. So how do we maximize creativity in the workplace? And I think it's everyone would agree, yes, creativity is good. But I think in reality, creativity is often suppressed. Like I did 8 years on Wall Street, and as an investment banking analyst, you're told what to do exactly every step of the way. Use this presentation, use this font. If I used a different font, I would get in so much trouble, right? Use this model, do it this way. To me, I think creativity is all about like letting go, like letting yourself go. If you're a manager and you have a team, the balance between setting expectations and guidance and instructions and the guardrails, and then where that ends, and after that ends is this open field, this green field of letting the ideas flourish and letting people take over, do it their own way. Professor Brooks, what do you think is the way to maximize creativity?
Yes, I think it's a little bit of both. So a lot of times people try to manage creativity by focusing on output. And I absolutely agree with you, Jing, that this ends up limiting people. And there's some really interesting research on this in terms of benchmarking. So one example is they were asking people to come up with new types of furniture for disabled people. And in one condition, they simply said, for example, a wheelchair is one type of thing that could be used to help disabled people. And then they asked, okay, now generate whatever ideas you have. And simply mentioning the wheelchair greatly increased number of chair-based solutions. Even though if you ask people, like, did you borrow from the example, they would say no. And so when we benchmark by providing the outcomes we expect or the output we expect, we can really narrow and restrict people into what they can come up with. And same for just asking people, like in my example with my professors, saying, we really need super creative ideas right now, and raising that standard. Same thing, it can be really limiting to be told that all your ideas have to be good, and to have people start censoring themselves and maybe not suggesting some ideas by concern of being evaluated or judged. So we don't want to be limiting in terms of the output, but we can be helpful in terms of the input, influencing what comes there. So for example, we can do something called problem decomposition, because sometimes it's really overwhelming to just come up with new ideas. You can break it down into different subcategories, and that's very helpful. So you can actually expand the problem space that way. Another thing that I think is really helpful is we as humans are attuned to come up with solutions. So for example, in my class, I often show this image of a girl reaching for a book, and I ask people, what does she need? And my students most often say a book, or they need a ladder. And these are solutions, actually. A ladder is a solution to something, but what the person actually needs is maybe information or to learn even. And so again, by structuring the problem as a verb, by expanding the problem space and changing the input, what people are considering, you can really open up people's creativity. So it really goes back to what you were saying before, Jing, about whether or not it's innate. I think everyone has the ability to do it. And it's really, how do you structure, how do you frame the problem? What kinds of things do you get them to play with that can help, facilitate this intrinsic creativity we have, rather than focusing on the output, like what kind of font I want, or what kind of idea am I looking for, which can be really limiting.
I love Charles. If you want to speak up, I agree with you that everyone is innate, but creativity can be lost. And at 20 Muses, I talk to clients about this all the time. That as children, I think like Picasso has these great artists have these kind of quotes like every child is an artist, but the problem is when you grow up, what happens? So like I think kids are born with like infinite imagination, infinite creativity. And it's really like in school, public school, and then when you get a job and what you're told by your manager, you start putting, things into little boxes. Charles, feel free to jump in. You said that you've talked a lot about this on the blog. Writers, how they overcome writer's block. If you feel, if you're free, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sure. The basic idea is that if you just sit down and write and you say, I'm going to throw away what I'm writing, then it's a lot easier to write, and you might actually get some good stuff and change your mind and say, I'm going to save this. But if you sit down and say, I have to write something that is the most perfect thing because it's going to be seen by a million people, and then your brain breaks and creativity doesn't flow.
That's a really good point. Vahan or Hannes, any founders, I actually would love to know if you think, as a founder, what you think. Do you think even writing code or coming up with a business model, does that work? As I, on LinkedIn, I had a creativity poll, and there was actually a founder who said, who chose that he was not creative. And I replied, like, how can you, if you're a founder, you're creating a whole company. How could you not be creative? Of course you are creative. You're creating something out of nothing. Like that's really the definition of creative, So I'd love to hear from Frank or Antonio, Vahan, Brandon, any founders that would love to speak on your own creative practice.
I would like to talk. No, go ahead first.
There's noise around me, so maybe you go first.
Okay, this is gonna be, hey, my name is Elkanah Reed. I'm trying to think about this because I want to be super efficient because I know we got to start in 2 minutes. So really quickly, I would like to ask the group, what are the methods to harness creativity? Because I believe that everyone has the ability to be creative, like Ratatouille. I got 2 kids under the age of 5, so we watch a lot of Ratatouille. Everybody can cook. But in enterprises, if we can't harness the insights, to apply it to strategy, it's actually worthless. So then only one group of people gets to be creative. So I want to know, is anybody thinking about how do you harness those insights, connect them to the strategic plan so that you can move business forward?
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, I can say maybe to your question, I think it's a matter of conditions. I mean, creating a safe condition, a safe environment for people to just express themselves from the really their subjective point of view, and then kind of like take those inputs, take those perspectives, and kind of objectivize them by testing them, or triangulate them with some research and so on. So kind of becoming more analytical later. But yeah, it's really a matter of making sure that people bring their own self to a certain degree in the conversation. And obviously, I mean, it's not easy in an enterprise environment where there is like insecurity due to what you're saying and your role and your responsibilities.
I think a simple thing that founders of a startup, I assume it's a technology startup, and I've been in Silicon Valley for a few decades. I myself has been managing company and advising a tech company. Quite often, a very, very simple trick is that for founders to be asking questions as often as you can. There's a myth, and they're still putting male founder stereotypical expectation that you have to be as visionary as Zuckerberg and whatnot, and the founder enunciate the values and various vision thing. However, just as a founder, simple thing, and just like Melanie, Professor Brucks just mentioned, it's really a cognition issue. Very simple. Just tell me how you think, and then I think there might be this. You can add a little bit. So you let your team, enterprise team, to feel that they are free to express their concept, and kind of like combined with what Charles said, when the team begin to feel that they can talk and they don't have to worry about the big thing in front of it, and that is corporate culture, that can definitely help with the enterprise level creativity. On the other hand, financial industry is just totally different. Financial industry is heavily regulated. So there is a kind of dichotomy on two ends of the spectrum.
I love that. Emily, are you able to answer Alkanah's question? I just met Emily recently. She works at Adobe. Adobe is just creativity as an institution, and she was telling me so many amazing things, experiments that they've done with the future of work, with the workplace, with employee experience. And I think it's very meta of like taking creativity in the small doses, applying to products, applying to teams, applying to an institution. And I think Alkanah, that was what you were kind of looking for, right?
Yep.
Emily, do you want to share?
Yeah, I can share. Do you want me to share an example of something we've done recently?
Up to you. Just
Sure.
how to creativity in a little genie bottle. How'd you let it out?
Well, I mentioned that design constraints can sometimes force me to get really creative. And, we've done a whole bunch of really interesting workplace experience research at Adobe. And one of the things that we've done recently was launch a really cool program to help employees meet each other and as we return to offices. I think one of the sort of secret sauces that's been missing for a lot of folks is those like serendipitous in-person interactions. So how can we sort of creatively create conditions that encourage those to happen? And so what we wound up doing was designing a tabletop signal. It's really simple. It's two sides. It says join on one end and focus on the other. And it's basically a beacon to everyone who comes into, a cafe. We've launched them so far in cafes, but break rooms as well are coming. That you are, open to having someone sit down and join you and have a conversation. And so it's been really successful. We're seeing, it's really picking up in offices and driving those casual collisions. So I think, for us, the constraint is like, what's something that's, attractive that can sit out on a table at all times. We don't want it to block conversation, so it can be too tall, like visible across a room, incorporates color in a smart way. So yeah, we had a lot of fun designing that one, and that was a great recent example.
Yeah, that's the one in the background right there, right? The little cute show. Yeah, it's a really clever idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Denise or Paula or Jay, Rebecca. I just realized that in the beginning I was calling only on the men in the room.
On the dudes, how dare you, Jing? I had it's actually funny. I love that we use the word innate, because it's literally what I called my company, and it's called Innate Create. But almost looking at what you were saying before, like for me, I think you need a variety of tools and applications, because different personalities and different types are going to jump into different things. So, I specifically utilize Legos as a vehicle to get through different challenges and different problems. But the reason why I started my company is not only did I see this Lego thing, but I fell in love with the idea of design thinking back in one of my previous roles, and not in product design, but in applying it into a lot of different areas, because those basic steps of empathy, of clearly defining your problem, of being able to prototype something out of cardboard, and not spend $1 billion. Wow. These are things that I can do in my daily job. And for me, like, that was the cracking of the egg, if you will, because I remember seeing people that I worked with that were bright, that were intelligent, but were not only maybe afraid of being creative, or maybe didn't think they were creative, but when you gave them space, when you gave them environment, when you gave them tools and allowed them to play a little bit and to try and to fail and to stumble and not, I think it was said earlier, right? The outcome isn't necessarily the point, it's the process, it's the effort that is the point. Then suddenly it's like, oh, okay, I can play this game. I can do this just fine. So I think there's that variety of pieces that are out there. And that is not at all intended to be a Lego pun, but now that I said it, it is. So it's my piece.
Last one person to chat, if Lisa, if you're available. I saw your comments in the chat, and I love what you talked about with like having a safe space for creativity to flourish, and giving people the runway. We're gonna do our breakout and come back. I just want to give, I might be saying the name wrong, but Lisa, if you are available.
Hi, yes, it's Lisa. So yeah, it was one of the questions that I had. Well, first, going back to creativity, a lot of it is, and I work for a company that we're very structured. And so we still need to figure out, how do we allow for creativity within the confines of, our, just how we work operationally. And I think that's a challenge that we're dealing with. We have employees who are very creative, but in a space that hasn't generally been known to be as creative. So there's a clash of cultures there. And then the second piece, the question that I had was around, when we take that idea of creativity, how do we apply that to the hybrid environment, right? Because there's times when it's easier when everyone is in person. You may do an activity that's there, or you can establish, a certain way of thinking or structure, but the future state of work and the focus around that has changed how we think about, making sure that there's parity in our practices for all employees across locations and across, their individual setups, whether it's at home or in the office. So wondering how everyone has worked with that, or anyone who has had experience working to resolve some of those challenges, where something that has been applied for in-person has also been applied for those who are remote or hybrid.
Yeah, great. I'm going to take 1 minute to answer that, and separately offline, we should chat together with Denise here, who is the founder of Sway Workspace, which is all about the hybrid playbook. So that's exactly what we do at 28 Muses. I'll just take 1 minute, and then we'll do our breakout. So I would love to answer kind of like Alkana's question and your question, and kind of like sum this up. to me, creativity, Alcana had the really hit it on the nail. Like, how do you really use creativity to produce business results, right? At the end of the day, every business wants higher revenue, higher productivity, happier employees. And I think creativity is absolutely the tool, but it needs, someone talked about a psychological safe space for people to express themselves. Melanie talked about the fact that the outcomes should not be, determined in advance. So that's where, that's exactly how 20 Muses have really, structured things. So we don't do anything that is like a cooking class where we show you the dish that we're all going to cook together, because when you see the outcome in the beginning, then you've already said that in your brain as like, that's what I'm supposed to do. You're already shutting off a lot of things in your brain that are triggers for creativity. You've just turned them off because you're not really encouraged to think outside of that dish, and silently half the people are constantly judging themselves or questioning themselves or saying, oh, mine didn't turn out right. Oh, you know what? I just know in advance mine's not going to turn out right. I'm not a good cook. I'm not good at drawing. I'm not good at this or that. Or, so-and-so's always turns out better than mine, or, all this like self-criticism. So for us, for 20 Muses, my own thoughts is that, one, creativity, we've all agreed that it can be trained. 100% of everyone here said creativity can be trained. So there can be a platform to kind of train it. And two, creativity should be a creative practice. It's not like a one time in 60 minutes you become better at anything. But as you go, if you do something, have a journal daily, have a 15-minute doodle daily, have a creative practice as a team once a month or every 2 months or even once a quarter, you'll see it accumulate. Like, even for myself, right? Every startup eats your own dog food. Like, even for myself, just doing all the 20 Muses experiences, doing all of them, I've always been creative. Like, I've always been an artist, but I've seen, I think, a big difference for myself, even in terms of problem solving, of coming up with different ideas. And we can do it in person or hybrid or virtual. I think that virtual and hybrid just needs a little more different style facilitation. Like I would say, most teams are already doing team building experiences hybrid or virtually anyway, because it's more inclusive. And it just needs to be facilitated a certain way. Melanie, I just want to give you a minute to maybe make any last comment, and then we're going to do our breakout. And if anyone can stay and come back, we can come back in the main room, ask Professor Brooks questions, and continue our group discussion.
I want to say this is like a wonderful thing to discuss creativity and to work together and collaborate and share ideas in this space. I think it's kind of like a meta experience, and it's a really nice one to have. And the other thing I would encourage, and one thing that I'm really excited about with 28 Muses, is being empirical and experimenting in your own life. Like, try these things out, like do an A/B test within your own experiences and see what works best for you. Listen to advice and then experiment with it. There's a really wonderful article out there that we don't treat our lives like a large experiment, but it is, and we should be experimenting with stuff all the time. So there's one thing I'd encourage is like, listen to these different ideas about how to be creative and then try them out and see what works for you.
I love that. And Melanie and I are actually working on a creativity experiment. So if your team or your company is interested in joining this experiment about the identity of creativity, about different ways to be creative as a team, let me know. Reach out.